I want to review with you my custom settings and why I have them the way I do. On the initial freeze, I have my settings at 0. The reason for this is most freezers will go down to 0 degrees. I want to match the setting of my freezer with that of my freeze dryer. But when I pre-freeze, I want to match the temperature of my freezer with my freeze dryer, and that's why I choose 0. When I pre-freeze my food, I like to load my freeze dryer when the temperature setting of my freeze dryer is around 15 degrees, somewhere in the teens. On the extra freeze time, I pre-freeze my food pretty much a full 24 hours before I load my freeze dryer. So I set this to 0. I really don't need to add any extra freeze time because I pre-freeze my food for a full day before it comes into my freeze dryer. Dry temperature, I have it at 130. Now, food pretty much starts cooking at 140 degrees. Well, I do not want to try to cook my food while it's freeze drying. The Harvest Right freeze dryer, and this is my observation over the last 3 or 4 years that I've had my freeze dryer, has a swing temperature of about 10 degrees. So basically, during the heating cycle, the Harvest Right freeze dryer will go past the set point, plus 10 degrees and minus 10 degrees. So if I set this at 130 degrees, the swing temperature will go up near 140 degrees and will come down to about 120 degrees. So if I set this at 130 degrees, that's just about right. The temperature will go up nearly to 140, will drop down to 120, so 130 for me is just fine. The extra dry time I leave at 12 hours. The freeze dryer finishes the cycle when it no longer senses sublimation. If it does that in the middle of the night or while I'm at work, I don't want it to shut down while I'm not around. And so I leave it at 12 hours. That gives me plenty of time when I wake up or when I come home from work to be able to take care of any food that might be in there so it doesn't go cold. I'm sure many of you have had a freeze dryer cycle finish up and you come to find out that all the trays are cold and you may have to heat those up. At a 12-hour setting, I don't run into that problem. The dry mode, I always keep that on fast. There is a normal mode, but that's more for quite delicate structures, and I really don't ever have a need for that. So these are my settings, and I like them quite a bit. To start my batch, I'm going to come up to the freeze dryer. I'm going to go ahead and hit start. And the only time I'm ever going to do this is at this point. I'm going to manually advance the freeze dryer by hitting the leaf. Now I'm only going to do it this time because I'm not going to wait 15 minutes before loading the trays, because in this case I'm not loading trays. So I'm going to hit the leaf. I'm going to go ahead and hit continue, and at this point I'm going to set my cell phone for 1 hour. I'm going to set the timer on my phone for 1 hour because I know in 1 hour's time at room temperature my freeze dryer is going to be down into the teens. The goal I'm trying to get to is around 15 degrees, and that's the perfect time for me to put my trays into the freeze dryer to get ready for the batch. And as you note, temperature right now in my house is 71 degrees. My goal is to come back at 1 hour to have it 15 degrees. I'm at 1 hour, so I'm going to go get my trays and load my freeze dryer. I'm at 12 degrees. That's pretty darn close to being at 15. And with having these trays being in the freezer, they're fairly dry as far as it comes to moisture, and they're fairly cold. This is really going to accelerate the temperature down to 0. It won't be long for this to go into vacuum freezing. And there we go. So you take a look at the time. From the time I loaded the trays to now, that was what, maybe 4 minutes from the time I loaded the trays to the time it hit vacuum freezing.
Vacuum pump just started up, and I should be getting a text message just about any second now.
Message from Argus Rain Freeze Dryer Vacuum Pump running. Sent from power 586,894 to 01 at October 7th, 2023, 11:33 and 10 seconds. Source 01.
And that's my text message. So this starts the vacuum freezing, and I expect to do these strawberries in probably about 24 hours. I'll let the freeze dryer do its thing. I'll come back here in about 6 hours and do the first tray rotation, and I'll do that every 6 hours until it goes into extra dry time. I'm coming up on 6 hours. I'm going to do my first tray rotation. I'll do one now right before I go to bed, when I wake up in the morning, when I come back home from work. Basically every 6 hours is what it comes down to, sometimes every 8 hours. And it's pausing the freeze dryer. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to reach back here, I'm going to open the valve and let the initial amount of pressure down. I'm going to reach behind the pump, I'm going to turn off the pump, let the pressure die down. And I'm going to go ahead and open the door. I'm going to take the bottom tray, going to turn it 180 degrees, just put it up on top of my freeze dryer. Take the next tray, 180 degrees, put it in the bottom. The second tray, 180, put it into the third slot. Top tray, 180, put it into the second slot. And then this tray goes into the top slot. Shut the door, shut the valve, turn on the pump, and on we go. I'm ready to take out my strawberries. It took 24 hours for the machine to recognize that the sublimation stopped on my strawberries, and then I went with 10 additional hours on extra dry time. So we're going to go ahead and open everything up and take a look at things. So we're going to go ahead and run down the time, and no defrost. And I'm going to get a text message here in just a moment.
Message from Argus Rain Freeze Dryer. Freeze dryer cycle is complete. Sent from power 586,894 to 02 at October 8th, 2023, 2046 and 32 seconds. Source 02.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and open up the chamber here. Now, most likely because I'm doing 12 pounds of strawberries, we're going to have some cold spots. So we're going to have to double check this to see how everything is. And I'm just going to take all these to the kitchen, and we're going to check the strawberries out there. There are all kinds of gadgets that you can use to determine if your strawberries still have ice crystals or cold spots in them. But the best thing you have are your own fingers. So I'm just going to go through here. I'm just going to probe the strawberries with clean hands. I'm looking to fill in for cold spots. That's how simple this can be. So far, this tray is pretty good. And that's one of the reasons why I rotate them, to make sure that each tray, front and back, is exposed to the same amount of heat, and that's why we put the same amount of weight in each tray, so that one tray doesn't finish up while one tray might have more weight and isn't finished. So this tray, that's good. And no cold spots on this tray. So all my trays of strawberries are all dried, ready to pack up. So I'm going to do that right now, and then I'm going to go back and take care of the freeze dryer. Now I have here 4, well, I guess I could call them Mylar bag, but to be accurate, these are polyester bags because there's no such thing as a Mylar bag. That's a long story. Got a video out on it. I'm going to put down strawberries. And today's date. I'm going to do that on all my bags. Then I have my oxygen absorbers. These are all 300 cc. And we're going to go ahead and put one in each bag. And we're going to go ahead and put the strawberries in the bag. And then we're going to get the impulse sealer out. And turn it up to 7. Now normally I vacuum seal all my freeze-dried food, but when it comes to fruit, I do not vacuum seal any of my fruit because it just leads to clumping, and that's when basically the food, which is hygroscopic, you'll end up with this one big mass of fruit because the vacuum force is in a Mylar bag or a polyester bag. If you vacuum seal it, it's just going to crush and force all the fruit into one big ball, and it basically destroys your fruit. Now, if you're going to use a mason jar, you can vacuum seal a mason jar, and I'd recommend it. But it won't, because the jar is rigid, it won't cause your fruit to clump. So when I do seal my bags here, I just do it so the bag just barely sticks through on this side. Then I wait for the machine to stop, and I just let it cool down a bit. Turn it over and bring it out on this other side. So I just basically make a double seal, one seal on top of the other. Just like so. There's going to be 2 seals, one on this side, one on the back side, so there's one seal is piggybacking upon the other seal.
This ends part 2 of how I freeze dry. Part 3 will continue with vacuum sealing, how I oil change, getting ready for the next batch. And I hope you stick around for part 3. A link for part 3 will be at the end of this video.